Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage.
Okay, guys, so here's a bit of an experiment. You know, I really hate the lighting in here, but of course this is a garage. And I think you noticed on my previous videos, my overhead lighting is so incredibly bright. Of course, that's a functional thing. That I wanted to see what I could do. It's distracting to me because it's so bright. And the only thing I had is a floor lamp. I decided not to bring a floor lamp, but I have some emergency lighting. So I decided to bring this thing here, which is a battery-operated thing that you use, you know, when the power goes out. And I figured, oh, well, that works. And, you see it here? My salt lamp. I have a salt lamp made out, it's heavy as hell. It's a hunk of real salt that they stuck a light into, and it weighs a ton. And that's my mood lighting, my nice orange glow. And I was hoping that would be enough on its own, but it's not. So, let me adjust this a little bit. Can you see the salt lamp? Yeah, see now? You can see the salt lamp. Because this, I'm warning you, that the salt lamp may be the high point of this video. This isn't a video so really about music. I'm not going to talk about albums or anything. I decided to do something different. And that is, I talk about Tales from the Garage. I'm going to talk about a tale. And it's only because it's not even so much about me. But I want to talk about my buddy Glen, somebody that I've jammed with over the years, and I'm still in touch with. And I realized he would never come on and talk about this kind of thing. But it's one of those few collaborators that I've had that I've done jam sessions with over the years. Actually, over many years now, because we first got together around 1995. One of these days, we're going to do a real formal album together, just the two of us. And you know, listening back to our jam sessions, which I have playing very subtly and quietly in the background, a couple favorites of mine. And I realized, wow, there's enough ideas in some of our old jams that we could actually do an album, you know, kind of take ideas out of the jam sessions, arrangement ideas, whatever, even a change here and there, and make a really nice, decent, overdubbed duo thing, which I love to hear myself from other musicians. You know, even though most of the stuff I do is on my own, by myself. So, I wanted to talk about Glen, who I haven't spoken to for a number of months now. He lives over in New York City with his wife, who's he married a good gal because she's a musician. One of the things that she does is a musician, and she plays guitar and bass. And herself, she's more in the song-oriented thing. You know, not the kind of thing that Glen and I would get together and do. And she's actually been the bass player for a doo-wop group that still tours around the country, but she is their bass player when they play in New York. And I'm not sure if they're based in New York now or not. This is an old doo-wop group that roots go back to maybe the late 50s, but at least the early 60s. I don't know how many original members there are in this group. Maybe one. I know one of the members is a brother of the original member, I believe, that passed away. And whenever they play in the New York City area, she's their bass player. So she's semi-professional as well. And initially when I met Glen, he was just starting to play drums. Now, through the years of knowing him, he also started doing keyboard improvisations. Depending on where he lived, sometimes he'd have an upright piano. Eventually he bought a synthesizer. And I think it was only after he met his wife that, because she could play guitar and bass, that he started getting into that. So I'd say he's a better keyboard player than I am now, even though he didn't, when we first started jamming, he barely played anything at all on keyboards. And the last time I had him come over, I gave him some of my guitars. I think he brought his as well. And I was really amazed at his advancement as a guitar player as well. So he's like a full band. But he doesn't do much recording. And one of the things I stuck in his hands last time he was here was my kalimba. And I had him, which I actually have inside. And I had him he had never played a really decent kalimba before. The one I have is fairly nice. Little thumb piano thing. And he was really enjoying playing it, so I decided to record him playing it. And I did a Brian Eno kind of processing on the sound after the fact. I added some reverberation and chorus on there and stuff like that. And I'll link the channel that is on. See, I like this mood lighting already better. It's more moody. You can't really see what's behind me here. I think that other light is just too damn bright. And of course, I'm going to kill the battery on my emergency light here that I'm using, and then the power is going to go out, and I'm going to go to turn it on, and of course, it's not going to work. But that's life. Getting back to Glen and why I like to talk about him so much, because he's one of those people with interesting quirks. I started a job in 1988 that I stayed at for 27 years. It was initially a small company. And after a year or year and a half that when I was there, Glen's older sister was working there also. And Glen was a guy that was going to college at the time. And during his summer breaks, his sister got him a job, working for the summer at my company. Happened to be right in the same area where I was working. I'm going to open a can here. Cheers. It's just seltzer. And Glen, for the summers that he was in college for a couple of years, through his sister, would come to work for the summertime in my department, in my area. And his sister said to me, I guess his sister knew I was heavily into music somehow, even though I didn't really work with her, and introduced Glen to me and said, you guys will get along. And Glen had really just started playing drums within a year or so, I want to say. I don't think he played before he got out of high school. And, like a lot of people, he was interested in the drums and bought a kit and started playing. And it took a few years, I guess, after he graduated school, he came to work full-time for the company, and we were always got tight, got to be very good buddies very quickly. But it wasn't until about 1995 that we finally got together. So, by the time we had our first jam sessions, and the early ones were a little bit, not much happening really. But they were interesting, I would say. So I guess by the time the first time we played together, he had been playing drums at that point for a number of years, so he'd gotten a certain skill level. During that interim, though, between the time we actually first formally got together to play and the time that he started the company was several years, actually. He was working full-time for the company. He was playing drums. And he was really seriously getting into the drums and music in general. And I don't know where and how he came up with the idea, or whether it was his idea or not. But he went and got a rental of, one of these storage spaces where they rent out, storage space for people to store their furniture and belongings, whatever. They're all over the place here. I guess, the closer to a city and a very dense populated area you live, especially where there's, a lot of apartments and condo living, if people have belongings, they don't have any space for them. And they rent these storage places, and you just drive down the highway here, and the highways are lined with them. Of varying types too, because some of these, and not all of them, you have 24-hour access. Well, Glenn found one in a town very close to where he was living, here in New Jersey. And it wasn't a multi-floor thing. Everything was on the ground floor. All the storage rooms were on the ground floor, and it was 24-hour access. There was a big gate, and you had a keypad, and you had a code. I think each person got their own individual code, based on the ID of your storage. Like your address of your storage room. And so Glenn got this idea to get this storage space, which allowed him to play his drums at all hours of the day and night. There was never anybody in there at night. I'm not sure whether the owners knew or even cared what he was doing. Any nearby houses were far enough away that they would never hear anyway. But to be honest, these rooms are really pretty much soundproof. There's no windows, so it was very much like a man cave. It was very strange because they had these big, heavy wooden doors, the types of which I've never seen otherwise. And you'd pull this door open, and it was like this thick. It was enormous, and so no sound got out of there, as if they for some reason needed them to be soundproof, even though they were just storing. For the most part, it was furniture people were storing there. And so Glenn got this, and all these places, all these rooms, were pretty much the same size, it seemed, in this facility, and they were not very wide. I want to say maybe 6 feet wide, but they could have been a little bit wider. So it's not terribly wide, but long. It's like a long hallway almost. Actually, even this room is more square than that one was. And so you'd open up the door, and you'd have this space laid out in front of you, and of course there's no windows or anything. All the way at the back of the room, Glenn would set up his drum kit so that when he was playing, his back was essentially to the wall, and he'd be facing the door, even though the door didn't have any kind of window in it or anything. And as soon as you went in there and closed the door, it was pitch black. Didn't matter what the hell was going on outside. Could be the middle of the summer and the sun's beating down. There wasn't even that little light thing around the door, where you see you can see the sunlight creeping through the cracks in the door. Not even that. And it would create this, it was a real man cave. You had no idea what time it was in there. And Glenn had a lot of forethought when he was preparing for this, because there's no heating or air conditioning or anything in these storage rooms. I guess that big thick door, part of the reason it was there was really preventing the extreme weather from getting in. If it was 20 degrees outside in the wintertime, it wouldn't get anywhere near that cold in there. I guess because of these doors and all the common walls, to the next units. And Glenn had an electrician actually come in, cut a hole all the way up toward the top of the ceiling, as high up as he could get, by an electrical outlet, and had an air conditioning unit, like one of the larger ones that you would put in your window, and cut a hole in the wall there and put this air conditioning unit in there. And the cord was dangling down, and then it was plugged into an outlet that just happened to be right there on the wall. And that was on the same side that the door was, so the air would come out into the whole room. which was a very good idea. And of course, Glen's all the way at the back of the room. And he had that for the extreme in the summer. I think he must have used space heaters in the winter. But because of the door being closed so tightly and kind of like body heat and stuff like that, I don't think the place ever got like outrageously cold in the winter. Especially because Glen's main reason for being there was to play drums and very physical action. And so after he had this electrician come to install the air conditioning, he was pretty much set, and he had his drum kit there. He put shelves on the wall, and he had all his percussion on the shelves, all along the long walls. And I remember it looked like a foot pedal store, because he had more bass drum foot pedals than I've ever seen in one place. I don't know what his thing with bass drum foot pedals are, but he had just tons of them lining the walls. It looked like it was a store, like they were for sale, along with some percussion stuff that maybe wasn't hooked up to the kit. And at one time he bought an electronic kit, and so he had incorporated the electronic kit pads and everything into his acoustic kit. So it was quite a feat for him to get behind the drum kit, because the drum kit was as wide as the room was. So he'd kind of have to like walk around and squeeze himself between the back wall and like the cymbals and the floor toms and all that kind of thing, just to get back behind the drum kit. But by putting the drum kit up against the back of the room, it left the whole rest of the room wide open. So he had shelves on the wall, and I don't know how long. It didn't probably take him very long to get the other stuff that he had in there. He had a small couch, long enough for him to take naps on, which I remember he said he used to do on a fairly regular basis, actually. Also pushed up against the wall, above which was the shelves with his drum equipment. And on the other wall, he actually had a wooden entertainment center where he had a television. You couldn't get any reception in there, but he had bought a VCR. This is kind of before the DVD age. He said he had bought a VCR, and he had a small collection of tapes. Most of them were, or a lot of them were drum lesson tapes, VHS tapes, the kind of thing, that you would buy, and they would teach drum techniques from well-known drummers. He had a bunch of those. I think he would occasionally bring in other stuff to view, more as a entertainment or maybe like a music concert on there. But he had a TV, and he had you could take pictures of this place, and he would say that this is inside somebody's house. And the great thing was having the couch there, of course, because it allowed him to get into some marathon sessions. And his brother played guitar a bit at the time, and he had a friend who was a bass player. So pushed up against the wall, it'd be a couple amplifiers generally, which there was enough space for, because he had put his drum kit all the way up against the back of the wall. And I would say the room is probably about the same length as my garage. Probably very close to the exact same dimensions in terms of at least the length, with the drum kit being all the way against where the garage door is back there. And he was really into it, and I love this place. And even now we talk about the studio, and he had it for a number of years, after which he gave it up, and that's, I wouldn't say one of the regrets, because at this point it wouldn't be so practical, because he's living in New York City. And he has actually in recent years, since he moved to New York City, gotten another storage facility. It has a lot of storage in it, though, and it's not nearly the size of the old place. But he actually, in the last year or so, did set up a drum kit in there so he can go there and play. That's a little bit of a hike from his house, and it's not quite the oasis that he had created in the studio. And we can always just talk about it and say, the studio, and we know which one we're referring to, because this place was, a place you could go into and spend pretty much almost an entire weekend there. There was a pizzeria right around the corner, so he can go and get food, and there was plenty of places. If you jumped in your car in 5 minutes, you could be in a million places to get food anyway. The only thing it didn't have was, a kitchen and a bathroom. And if there was a way for him to install those, he could have easily lived there. But it was a weird place. And, I went there several times. I fell in love with the place immediately upon seeing it. We had jam sessions and went on a Saturday, I want to say like early afternoon initially. But it, dragging my equipment, I'd bring a guitar and a keyboard or whatever. And actually, the things that I'm playing in the background, to whatever extent you may be able to hear them, were recorded there. And I used to have, I still actually have a big-ass reel-to-reel recorder, combo unit reel-to-reel recorder that I used to bring there, and it was heavy as crap. I mean, it was definitely a two-man operation to carry it in. And I had it on a stand, and I would record our music there because I could have just brought a cassette player, but I wanted to get as high audio quality as I could, even though it was just us jamming. And I'd bring these big reels of tape, and you're constantly watching the reel of tape to see if it's running out, which it often did during our 40-minute marathon, 40-plus minute marathon space jam things going on. But I'm glad now that I had recorded these on reel to reel, and I have a bunch of them in my computer. Some of them transferred from cassettes because I went from reel to cassettes, and I haven't ventured to hook up the reel to reel to get an ultra high quality copy, but I don't think I need it. The cassette quality is really good on the ones I recorded off of the reels, and I'm not releasing these commercially type of thing. But I'm glad I had the quality from the original reels. Reel-to-reel tape sounded really good. At that point, really high quality, and really before the home digital computer revolution thing happened. And so I'd go in there on Saturday afternoon type of thing, and we'd play for a while. But as soon as that door was closed, you really, you're playing music and you're whatever, losing track of time, and you would never know what you're going to see when you would open that door again. Would there still be sunlight, or would it be pitch black out? And that was the magic of that place. And now Glen being the thing that always makes me laugh, and the first thing I always think about when I think about the studio, Glen's studio, was the fact that for Glen this wasn't just like a weekend thing, or go in 1 or 2 nights after work kind of thing and play for a couple hours. This was a lifestyle, and I guess because he must have been in his mid-20s. He might have even still been in his early 20s when he first got the studio, but he's certainly in his mid-20s during the heyday of having the studio. He would go in there after work. He'd work a 9-hour workday or whatever it was, standard like 8 to 5 kind of job, and maybe even work a little bit late, and maybe drop off home after work briefly, and maybe eat dinner or pick up something to eat on his way to the studio. I know one of his pretty much daily habits at that point would be to stop at I think it was a 7-Eleven, and get a couple huge coffees. Really big coffees. Now, even though he had been drinking coffee all day, this was the night session now. And I guess being young and being able to, do things like stay up the kinds of hours at night that you can't imagine doing as you get older, he would go to the studio pretty much every night. Start, like late dinner time or right after dinner time. Would play for hours and hours and hours. Sometimes he would take a break and take a nap on the couch, which was why the couch, one of the reasons why the couch was there. And it must have been weird because, when he would wake up, it would be pitch black, like you couldn't see. and he would have to kind of feel his way out the front door. Because the one thing I didn't mention that was unique to the way this place was set up was there's a very big bright overhead light. And obviously the place had electricity, had an outlet. But all of the electricity was controlled by, if you've ever seen an old egg timer, you know, one of those physical things that you use for cooking, and you set on 15 minutes or 35 minutes, and it pings when you know your food's done, you know, when the time's up. Outside of the door, attached to the front wall, but outside the front door, was this timer switch, basically, that you could set only up to an hour. So what happened was that when you'd go in there, the first thing you would do, you would have no lights and no electricity if you didn't turn the timer on. So you turn the timer on for an hour. And I guess the reason that they created the storage facility this way is so that no one would accidentally leave electricity on and then, you know, leave the storage facility and not go back for a year. In the meantime, you know, all these lights or whatever they turned on, because they did have some outlets in there, you know, would be going for a year, And I don't think they got charged for electricity. I think that was all kind of absorbed in the cost of the, you know, of the monthly fees. So in order to avoid anything from getting left on and causing potential problems, there was this little egg timer thing. And it was only good for an hour. So every hour it would go off. And regardless of what was going on outside, whether it was day or night, as soon as that electricity went off, the light went off. And I could imagine that it happened a lot of times when Glen is all the way in the back of the room playing his drums, not watching his watch because there's no clock on the wall, to say, oh, let me go up and set the timer again, you know, walk out and set the timer. And I'm sure the timer would go off on him while he was playing his drums. And he would have to very carefully feel his way out of the back wall drum kit, you know, feel along for the shelves on the wall and the couch to walk down to get to this door, which you couldn't see because it was pitch black, to go out to open the door and to turn this damn knob to get the electricity to come back on. And it happened to us when we were jamming all the time. We would go in, do a setup, and the last thing before you want to hit the record button or actually start playing was walk back out, because it would take, you know, 45 minutes or however long it took to set the equipment up. You know, I would always bring a recorder, and I had a keyboard and a guitar, and stuff took a while to set up. Plus, we'd be chatting away, you know. So the last thing before you start playing, let me go back out and, you know, push that door open and set the timer again to 60 minutes. And the number of times that we were playing and we were getting into a zone, of course, and, you know, really into it, and all of a sudden, boom, the power goes off, and of course all the instruments go off and it's not recording anymore, and the only thing you can hear are the drums because they're acoustic. Was pretty funny, you know. And I have a few recordings on the reel tape where you hear the music going, and all of a sudden you hear pop, and everything stops, you know, and it's the sound of the power going off. So that was a fairly unique thing about that place. So of course, when Glen was there by himself, I could imagine this happening, and there he is all the way at the back, you know, playing the drums, and the power goes off, and you can't see anything. And him having to feel his way around to get to the front of the room. And the room was pretty well packed with stuff, you know. To get out the door, to turn this light on again. And of course, he would take, as I mentioned, he would do these sessions after work and play for, you know, maybe several hours and take a nap on the couch. Now, while he's napping on the couch, of course, the power is going to go off. So, you know, I can imagine him waking up in this completely black room, you know, and at first probably not even knowing where the hell he is. There's no light at all, you know, waking up from his nap and having to think of where the hell he is at first, you know, before he kind of stumbles up to his feet and walks back out to the door to turn the damn timer on again to get the electric to come back on. But the funny thing about it is I used to get, at the job at work, I used to get pretty much almost daily voicemails from Glen. Fairly long ones, which I enjoy. Many of them I kept for years, and I wish, to this day, I wish that I had transferred them to a cassette or something, so I still had them, because I always remind him of these. And now he shakes his head. He's like, I don't know how I did that. And he would leave me a basic diary on voicemail at work the following morning about what he did the previous night. And it would be like, yeah, I got in the studio, I got there, after dinner, and I played for a couple hours. I took a nap, or I didn't take a nap last night. And but I left early, because I was feeling kind of tired, surprisingly. So I only played until about 2:30 to 3 in the morning. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. You're at work at 8 o'clock, and he's leaving the studio at like 2:30, 3 in the morning, sometimes later. Going home, getting a few hours sleep at best, and arriving for his day job incredibly bleary-eyed and starting the coffee going right away. But how he could do that for more than one day is beyond me. And now I always tease him about the calls. I do my impression of him calling and leaving the voicemail where he tells me what he was working on, or what he was playing, or that he got into a groove doing this or that, or whatever he was talking about. Or that he took some time off to watch a video in the studio, on the TV, on a VHS tape, and whether he did or didn't take a nap, that whole thing. But I was fascinated by this. To me at the time, there was there's no YouTube or anything like that, So these calls were like better than television, So how'd you do last night? Oh, I had a good night last night. I played till 4 in the morning, And of course now when he hears it, he's like, I don't know how I did that, because it wasn't a once in a while thing. It would be a big deal if he didn't get, for some reason, because he had some responsibility or something to do with the family, or he had to go shopping, for food or whatever. There might be a night when he didn't get into the studio, or he would get there and be there for an hour or something. And of course, a lot of the weekends were marathon sessions. So he could go and hang out with buddies or friends or whatever, but then afterwards he would always go to the studio. So it was a time, if you wanted to catch him, that would probably be the place to do it, if you had access, And he loved it because, there was never anybody around at those hours. You had this big gate, this keypad, and you just entered your code in the keypad, the gate opened, and in you were. You park right by your little storage unit there, and it was such a unique place and such a magical time. And he had it for a number of years, and kind of gave it up reluctantly as life progressed. Though he got a smaller place that was down the road. He also got another place that he rented in this old crumbling building that was not being used anymore, and so basically it was only used by pretty much rock bands to practice, because this building was just decimated, and it was an old building that was eventually torn down. But in its last few years, it was basically used for if people wanted to put storage in there. It had been, I guess, kind of like a small office building at one point, but it was really old. And so after Glen had given up the studio, a couple years later, he found this rock band that had this fairly big room that they had set up in. And oddly enough, inside this room was another smaller room. And he kind of co-rented that smaller room and put his drum kit in there. But that didn't last long. And it certainly wasn't the same. I imagine he could go there at all hours. But the weird thing is, this other place that he got years later that he co-rented with this rock band was right in the town next door to where he lived. And he took me there one night. He didn't have it for long, because I only saw the place once, I think. But oddly enough, I followed him in the car. He said, I'll show you where the new place is that I've been co-leasing here, co-renting. And oddly enough, when I got there, I looked across the street, and there's a building that I had worked at for 3.5 years, right directly across the street. I mean, you're 20 feet away. And it was weird because that was also an old factory building that when you see it from the outside, you thought this is an abandoned factory. It's disgusting. It's decrepit. It's falling down. There were mice just infested the whole building, even while I was working there. And it was one of these things where there was some manufacturing going on one floor. So there was packing and manufacturing going on. And then there was another floor where I worked in this old building at the time prior to meeting Glenn. This was several years before I met Glenn, actually. I was working at this building. It was a very depressing, dark kind of time in my life. And it was so weird that this new studio that he was co-renting out, that he used for a short time, was right across the street. And I used to stare at this building when I worked at that job at the time, and wonder what the hell was in there. Or if anything was in there, because all the buildings in that area of a town called Wallington were just old factories that were pretty much abandoned and had fallen into disrepair and were just covered in mice and probably rats too. And but I had worked there quite a few years, a good 5 years before meeting Glenn. It was an alarm monitoring company, you know, those when you have a home alarm system and you trip it off and these people call you on the phone. It's a 24-hour-a-day job, and I actually worked there. There was this alarm company monitoring station that worked out of this old decrepit factory building. It was just filthy. It was the kind of thing like, you know, you wouldn't even want to sit down when you got home from work because you felt your clothes were filthy. You know, these old office chairs that were probably bought used, and there were 3 shifts of people using them, so you never even had your own chair. You know, it was monitoring 24 hours a day, so you would have this 8-hour shift, and then somebody else would come and take your spot and sit in that chair, so you didn't have your own desk or chair or anything. But it was so weird seeing that building again right across the street from where Glenn was later on temporarily renting this other studio, you know, which wasn't anything like the first one. The first one that I've been talking about that he had for years was just something with that egg timer on the wall. I don't know. The thing I don't understand is why they didn't put the timer for the electricity on the inside wall. Wouldn't that make sense? Because it would still turn the electricity off after 60 minutes, you know? Because you could essentially go and walk down the row and turn on everybody's electricity, even though nobody was in there. And, you know, you could turn their knobs, and their electricity would be going for an hour, even though there was nobody there. So it's kind of weird that they put them on the outside of the wall. But, you know, outside of the actual storage building facility, you know, so that you would have to go outside to turn it back on too. Because I can imagine it would, even if you were just loading furniture in there and just going through your own storage, you definitely needed light because it was dark as hell in there. And you're going through boxes while you're in there, and the damn thing turns off on you, and you got to get up and walk totally, you know, the totally black room to go open the door to turn the electricity on again. But someday, you know, I'm always hoping, and I don't know if there's ever a time when I speak to Glenn when I don't talk something about the studio in those days. And we did a bunch of jams there, but the amount of time that I spent there, you know, I have a very vivid memory of what it looked like and everything. But the amount of time that I spent in there was nothing compared to the hours and hours every single week that he was in there. And, you know, every morning going to work, the highlight of my day would be, I hope I got a voicemail from Glenn and he's telling me what he did that night. And it'd be just incredible that he would say, yeah, well, I really couldn't play last night because I don't understand why I was so tired. You know, and this is after every day of going into the studio and playing for hours and, you know, going out at 3 in the morning, leaving and going home and sleeping for a few hours and then going to your day job. And he'd say something like, oh, I only played till 2:30 this morning. I don't know what was wrong. I was really tired. Just amazing. Just amazing. And I like to reminisce about them. And you know, I would love to get Glenn on camera talking about the studio. Sometimes he would never do it by himself, but if I could ever get him over here and get him talking about it on camera so I could post it up, I don't know if he'd ever go for that. But it would be great for me to have that, and I would even enjoy watching it, because I'm sure there's stories that he would tell, about things that happened there, or things he did there that are slightly interesting or whatever. And I think about it so much. And I thought I would just get on here and for anybody, just very few, I'm sure, people that are paying attention and listening to this or have any interest in this, it's probably a little funny anecdotal kind of thing. But I think about it so much, and it's such a big part of my musical thing too, And we recorded some very interesting little sessions there. And I'm going to, on this video, link a kind of a second channel that I created. And there's not a lot of content on it, but there are some of the jams and improvisations. Everything was improvised that Glenn and I did on there. I hope to add more content to that. I hope I can get content from Glenn, because I would love to put, some like solo stuff of his on there. But I'm gonna put a link for that on there. And actually, and the things that I've got up on there are quite old. They're from the late '90s that we recorded in there. Just some jams, So there's bad notes and everything in there, but some stuff is still worth listening to. Even though most of it has also been on my channel in the going back in the past and early when I started my channel. But also there's the most recent thing that I recorded where I don't play, but when Glenn came over here and he was playing around with the kalimba and he fell in love with it, and he after a few minutes I said, well, hold on a second, let me turn on the recorder, and I recorded it, and like I mentioned before, I did my kind of Brian Eno sound processing to it, and I put that up. That's probably a good thing to space out to. It goes on, for a fairly long period of time, and it's just one of those things kind of sit back and daydream to. That's on the channel as well. So I'm going to put a link to that there for anybody who's interested, and subscribe to that, because right now there's nobody subscribing to it for the most part. except for Carm. You can always rely on Carm, I think I could create a channel where I do nothing but make sounds with my mouth on it, and my buddy Carm, because he's such a great guy, he'd subscribe to it, and he'd encourage me, even though he'd probably moan every time he saw a video come up, oh, here's another video of him making mouth sounds. So, okay, tonight, at least this is my first time that I'm doing a video actually at night here now. Back in the garage, because the first couple that I did were daytime things, and even though it's not terribly late at night, I will get back to my, I'm sure, midnight and 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. videos out here. Okay, guys, if you've watched this, I appreciate it. And you're probably kicking yourself for wasting almost 45 minutes of your life, but I appreciate it, and it's just one of those things I wanted to get out there, because I have such fond memories of Glenn and his studio days, that I just wanted to share it as part of my personal history as well. Okay, guys. Next time I'll probably be doing, if I can think of things to talk about, stories videos. I'll try to label them as story videos and not music, where I'm talking about music. But next time, I'll be getting back to the record album reviews and the typical stuff I've been doing. So thanks for tuning in. Take care.
Tune in next time for more Tales from the Garage.